Thank you for joining us this morning. It's certainly wonderful to have so many bright, smiling faces here. This is our series on Lenten poetry with Sean Bell, Ann Anderson, Craig Wentland, and Emily Dickinson. I'm going to turn it over to Sean Bell, who has put together this study for us, and allow him to introduce himself and introduce our study.
All right, thank you very much, Kendra. Sean Bell from, looking here, I'm at Luther College at the University of Regina. That's kind of all our little logos there. And as you rightly know, you're here for Emily Dickinson and the Poetry of Lent. The problem with being a non-poet who starts to look at poetry and get interested in is that there's no agreement on how to do poetry right. And so when I mentioned to one of the English profs that we're doing Emily Dickinson, right away, they're like, oh, but you'll make sure to mention this and this and this and this and this. And I'm just like, no, I'm not, I don't think we're going that far down that road, right? But we'll do a little bit more with Emily Dickinson and that as we go along. This first session, I think, is all about seeing who's here, and Ann and Craig maybe go first so that they could see who was here first for leadership, and then we'll find that pattern and try to do that. One of the things that is interesting about this time is just how much we all hate Zoom at the same time. And so I wanted to maybe break it up a little bit here and share a bit of a video I got here, if I can find it here. This is the video I made last fall when we were all sort of hating Zoom. And so I want to show this video about just embodying ourselves where we are now, right? So can you see, is the video up there for everybody? So we'll just go through this one really quick and give it a watch here.
You have been lied to. Zoom, by its very definition, means to travel very quickly. And yet, when I think of Zoom, I think of this poor guy. This guy hunched over like a praying mantis, fingers barely active on the keyboard, eyeballs glazed over, video turned off, hunched back, feeling the pain. We can do better. How do we take our Zoom experience and make it look a little bit more like this guy? This guy looks cozy. This guy has hygge. What is this hygge?
Hygge is an adjective, cozy and comforting.
All right, hey everybody, I've got a word for you. Here it is. Can anyone pronounce that top word?
Hygge.
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 Think Swedish chef, Danish, Norway, something.
Hygge. Hygge.
Hygge.
Hygge.
There's a book about that, but I've never known exactly how to say it.
Maybe a hygge.
I vote for that one.
Important, trust me. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that one.
The hygge of Zoom. The hygge of Zoom. More to come.
Oh no.
Zoom does not have to be a lifeless place. This skeleton shows us that we can move anywhere in Zoom. And Zoom is kind of a joke now about how bad it is to be on Zoom, but you control the chair. You control the angle of the camera. You control which beverage you're drinking. You control so much of the Zoom experience, and with just a little effort up front, I think you can get a little bit more hygge in your Zoom.
But I do want to say as we begin, I have found Zoom to be incredibly life-giving, and there's a way to become present to Zoom and to become present where we're at, and still kind of have a sense of being fully present. So as we're gathering here together here, I thought it would be good for us to take a moment to take just one really big deep breath together. And in taking that deep breath together, across the country, we align ourselves together. And as we take that deep breath, I want you to notice what's going on in your body and what you're feeling right now. So big breath in, go in, and let it out. And notice, I'm carrying a lot of tension up in my shoulders here. What do you notice in your space? Is it too cold? Is it too hot? What do you notice? Are you feeling comfortable? Where are you at? Take another huge deep breath in. Feel it all the way in, and then let it out. Okay, and maybe just say, actually, I don't need to hold that tension. I'll just let that flop out a little bit and I'll just become a little more present, a little more relaxed. If you've got children running around, of course, you've got to make sure they're still, alive and doing that. But one more deep breath in, just really notice where you're at. And this time where your thoughts are at. Certain despair or anxiety or fear or hope or something going on. It's important to be very present to that and to breathe that in. I've got a song that I want us to all sing together here, and I'll try to make room for it here. Oh, put my face on there. That's weird. This song means that you have to stay on mute, and it's a call and response song, right? Because Zoom actually has all these weird delays, and Zoom has been working hard in the background to make sure that only one of us is talking at any one moment. It's this program that is anti-singing. It just does not work well to do any kind of harmonies together. But what I would like you to do is just in your own space, if you like, repeat the words as we sing this song, as we come, again, more present to where we're at now, so we can be attentive to whatever is going along in this community that we are together. So this song goes like this. You are in the right place. Try that. You are in the right place. You are carrying light. You are carrying light. God will not let you fall. God will not let you fall. You are in the right place. You are in the right place. You are carrying light. You are carrying light. God will hold you through all. There's a group called Music That Makes Community. They've been meeting on Monday mornings, and they've been practicing trying to sing together on Zoom and trying to do things that way. And my Zoom experience really honestly has been shifted by that, because I think I'm having a better time, or an easier time, just actually being fully present to what's going on. So in that becoming fully present, as Anne and Craig watch and think about their own things that they're going to be leading in the next week, and as I glance at the time and see that we're at 10:30 already, and I want to respect time and figure out where we're at, I want to have these questions. What will this time be? Honoring our space, who we are, I think are important questions to ask as we form this mini community that actually is turning into this little Lenten journey community that's going to kind of walk together all the way up to Easter there. So as we contemplate those things, I like to open with a prayer. And I take this prayer from the Reverend Richard Rohr, Friar Richard Rohr. And it's a prayer of the community of action and contemplation. I love that they put action and contemplation together, because contemplation doesn't have to be just doing absolutely nothing, because they contemplate and then they get to work. But let us pray this prayer together, and then we will talk briefly about who we are and what we want this time and space to be. Loving God, you fill all things with a fullness and hope that we can never comprehend. Thank you for leading us into a time where more of reality is being unveiled for us all to see. We pray that you will take away our natural temptation for cynicism, denial, fear, and despair. Help us have the courage to awaken to greater truth, greater humility, and greater care for one another. May we place our hope in what matters and what lasts, trusting in your eternal presence and love. Listen to our heart's longings for the healing of our suffering world. We'll take a brief silence and add your own intentions and thoughts and prayers about healing and suffering in our world where you're at. Let's take about 20 seconds here. Knowing, good God, you are hearing us better than we are speaking, we offer these prayers in all the holy names of you. Amen. So the first question, and maybe feel free to unmute and jump in as I ask this question, is who are we and what will this time be? All of us are under different COVID restrictions right now. So none of us is like super happy and out partying right now. And we're all living into this season of Lent. I saw a child on the screen, and other than my children, I didn't even know other children existed still, right? I haven't seen a child, like you go to the store, you don't see children there. And so I would like people to think thoroughly about what they want, and maybe in the chat would be the best place to do this, just because there's so many of us, and this will be a good place to like throw some ideas. Are we looking for kind of one or two people talking and giving information? Are we looking for more of a dialogue here? Because we know who we are. And if I were to like single any of you out and say, no, how are you really doing? Then we could all sit here till noon as, you know, we pop that thin veneer of I'm okay and we get down to how we're really doing. So this can't be like a therapy session for each person individually. We can't have each person just tell us all of their pain and suffering in one go, right? Although I'd encourage you to contact one another and do that work one to another. But what are we looking for? So just in the chat, or maybe even just unmute yourself and just shout it out right now. If you're looking for just a space to be together for an hour, or is this supposed to be, I want to learn everything about poetry and poetry is the most important part here, or I want to hear more theology about where Lent came from and why Lent's important to the church. Or maybe this is far too many questions to throw at you this early in the morning. And maybe I should just go with what I have written and then we'll engage kind of where it is, right? So I'm seeing a little bit in the chat there. Thank you, Anne. Yeah. So the connection to real life. Yeah. Poetry. Yeah. What is this poetry and how does it affect and how can we spend some time with that, dwell with that? The series I did last Lent was the Emily Dickinson poetry stuff. And yeah, it's interesting as somebody who hasn't done a ton with poetry. It was neat to dwell with Emily Dickinson and to try to dig into that a little bit. So
Joe,
a little theology. Yep, go ahead.
I'm really interested in exploring the poetry because I don't know anything about Emily Dickinson at all.
All right. Yeah. So we're going to learn a little bit about this literary figure, Emily Dickinson, and hopefully Anne and Craig are taking notes because whatever I don't cover today, you can maybe insert a little bit more of Emily Dickinson's life. Oddly, after I chose this series, Apple TV has a series called Dickinson or Emily Dickinson, which is a highly stylized version of telling the story of Emily Dickinson, which I read some reviews about. And, you know, some people are like, I mean, they're making a movie, so they elaborated a lot, right, to bring it to life. But maybe if you have Apple TV or access to that, you could watch the video. Tim, I see a hand.
Sure, I messed up my message and just sent it to Paul, so I'll say it. What I heard when we went around here is that there's some real keeners here. And I think if you were able to bring us a poem or a piece of scripture, and then we open it up for discussion, I think some really good stuff will come of it. So I wouldn't over prepare, but I wouldn't underestimate what you've got for us, Sean. I think you could get into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, well, I think that's kind of shaping us and guiding us a little bit. And the last thing beside my face there, honoring our space. I think this is just where we kind of do the courtesy nod to the idea that we should maybe work for a little confidentiality and trust within this group as much as you can trust a group of 21 strangers. But so, I mean, share what you feel comfortable sharing, but then just put some attentiveness in your own intention of what you're going to hear, and then not like I don't want Bishop Larry to get a bunch of notes about what Tim said in the Bible study for Emily Dickinson, saying, "Dear Bishop Larry, Tim Ray is a heretic again." You know, like we don't need that kind of thing going on, right? So let's just try and have like a little bit of a free space there. And by show of hands, who enjoyed sort of that singing thing on Zoom? Was that something that added, or I'm seeing some hands moving there. Yeah, yeah. And the other people can tolerate it, I guess, maybe. So there'll be a little bit of singing, I think, as we do that. I sure miss singing. I sure miss the harmonies and the sounds together. And that's one of the things that I'm sure looking forward to. So, all right, I think Anne and Craig have taken all of the notes that they need for that. And in some ways, we are becoming a community of practice now, believe it or not. We're shaping our practice of what it is to be alive during this time. And maybe we're actually going to end up accidentally looking into a little bit of what it means to have poetry and that kind of engagement of that part of our brains in our lives, right? So let's take a look at, this is not the good way to do this. You should have your slides all prepared individually, but I wanted to just play the intro to give ourselves a little bit of a break from thinking and take a few breaths, intentionally breathe as we watch the little promo video for that I made, because everything that we're researching and discussing here is actually going to be reduced, redacted, remade into short 12-minute videos for Luther High School for the chaplaincy. So again, not quoting you guys directly or taking video, but actually going to be taking concepts. So this is the little promo video here. So here we are. Ash Wednesday was last night, and by show of hands, who did something with Ash Wednesday? Normally we'd all gather in holy spaces in churches and see some things. So yeah, we were all there. I have my family and we gathered around the good old TV screen there, and you can see we had ashes delivered by Pastor Sarah Diamond, and that's her on the right on the video screen there, and we had what is normally a very, it's curious, like doing religious ceremony in the home is something that is often in our culture sort of outsourced to holy spaces and holy people to do that kind of Jesus-y holy work, right? And so it was suddenly very intimate to have to sit there and watch a video, which is nice because we could pause it as the kids needed to go to the bathroom 3 times during the show. But but it also was like just us sitting there. And the reason I wanted to show that is that when you put an ash cross onto your child's head, there's a lot of emotions that come through that for me, right? I mean, it's not ever an uplifting moment of like, from dust you came till dust you shall return, right? And then you're doing this to a 9-year-old who's sitting there. It's like, are we like wondering like, are we actually dying tonight? It's like, no, we're not literally dying tonight. But then you're trying to explain the difference between a myth and a metaphor and a symbol and all these things. And this is where poetry helps, I think. And to tell the child like, no, and I told my son Avi there, he's got the cross on the head. I'm just like, this sounds like some pretty bad news, right? From dust you came to dust you shall return. And here's some ashes like of a totally burnt out fire, right? And so Ash Wednesday takes on, for me, a slightly new meaning to apply it directly to your child. And then to think about, is this despair or is this hope? And I wanted to lead from despair as we hit our first poem. There's a certain slant of light, 1861, and I don't want to poison you to what it's about, but because I love the idea of encountering the poem just as you encounter it, because that's a valid way. Whatever the poem does to you, that's one valid interpretation of it. and then we can try and figure out what Emily was going through there. So why don't I give it a read here, just to come through the first time there. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any, 'tis the seal despair. An imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. And when it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So in the chat or out loud, what did you notice?
Certainly up top with mentions of cathedrals in heaven, and there seems to be something Christian or at least religious going on here.
Speaking as someone who hates February on the prairies, this is exactly how I feel. Well, I'm sure there's hope in there somewhere. Maybe I'll look more later.
Well, say more. So if it's not hope, what do you see?
Oh, okay. I see words like oppression, can't find a scar, indifference, internal difference. Okay, maybe that's not bad. Despair. That may be a little over exaggeration, but come the end of February, that's kind of right on. Anyway.
Well, we can do a show of hands in the polar vortex. I think we've all got to experience this. We don't have a single annoying person from Victoria here to tell us about blossoms and blooms. So, like, is despair the right word for a polar vortex in February? Who's felt a little bit of that? Maybe by show of hands. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah. Okay. No, I think Carol, Mom, I think you're onto something there with the despair thing. What do you notice? Tim?
I might be an anomaly, but actually I love the landscape in February when it's not -30, because what happens is the day lengthens, the snow actually turns blue. If you watch, to me, it's actually magical, because the sun will be golden, and what you look at the landscape and you think it's white, and then you look closer and it's actually blue. And to me, it's magical. And what is dark, or not dark, what is the blandness of winter is colored into something different by this setting sun. And I wonder if this death metaphor in Dickinson's poem, if she's looking at a similar kind of landscape. Hey, the sun is setting, which could be a metaphor of death, and yet that setting sun is somehow changing the light, changing the look of our landscape. And to me, it's not despairing. To me, it's gorgeous.
I think there's a bit of hope in it too, right at the beginning, where she talks about this certain slant of light winter afternoons. I think about the spots in our houses where the sun shines and people put a chair there, or they have a carpet and the cat curls up, or they like to read in that spot. And so even when it's bitter, there is a place where there is that hope that breaks through.
Yep, and it is the work of the poet to kind of show what's really there, but also the little twists that I think we're starting to notice within the poem here, right? Especially in this Lenten theme, thinking about drawing, dust to dust. You're you were a dust creature, you'll be a dust creature again one day. We need both in a sense, right? To stare the reality of it deeply in the face, right? But then to also find hope. The interpretation I found on Poetry Big Brain sites, talked about the need to fully present is what the poet is doing here, right? Is to be taking a single moment with a single shaft of light coming into a single time in the 1800s, living as Emily Dickinson, and fully expose that one long moment. And again, the webpage I was reading said, well, we know this is about a cold, longing, hopeless despair. And it's like, well, we don't know that, do we? We don't know what Emily Dickinson was feeling at that moment. And if you read in a moment in the brief, well, I'll go into Emily Dickinson's history a little bit. She did actually attend a women's seminary for a while. She did grow up in a Christian household. So I feel like there's always going to be a little bit of hope and despair balanced together here, right? And I can see why the authors of the study actually thought this would be a good first place to start into Emily Dickinson, because we can't do Ash Wednesday without staring despair in the face. And I found for Lent, I often had to pause and think about, and this is speaking from my privilege in a sense, it's like, yeah, how are things hard? And where is the darkness, and where is the gloomy thing? And it's like, no, my life's pretty good. And so you have to make up a few things, or you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna really strive this year, and I'm gonna give up coffee or something for Lent. And in some ways it was I feel like it was almost a playing at despair, right? Trying to find some despair to play at a little bit for the season of Lent, versus this year with everybody. And if you're at all in the counseling field, you have people coming and bringing their heaviness. We don't we don't have to fake Lent this year, right? I mean, last Lent we had all the memes went around like, oh, this is the lentiest Lent I've ever lented, because it all, the wheels really did fall off. And then in January and in the cold, I've been having people say, okay, that's it, I'm done, I've finally hit the end of my rope. And they just put that statement out on Facebook, sort of like, okay, looks like we're going to give you a private message, because that's not a very safe thing to throw out onto the internet, like to say like, that's it, I'm done, I quit, right? And the despair is so real. We haven't, I mean, mental health has been just such a crazy challenge through the university. We did have a suicide, unfortunately, at Luther College back in December, and we ran into all of the despair and all of the sort of the hiddenness around that. Nobody really wants to talk about it or publicly do anything with that. It sort of just disappears, and then the holidays happen. And personally, like, I was frustrated to run into the communications office of the University of Regina and the vicarious liability responsibilities of a public institution towards the students. So I didn't get to be a pastor, jump in the car and drive out to rural Saskatchewan and sit with the family, because that would have been highly inappropriate and something that you're not allowed to do. So yes, I think you picked up on the things there. I wonder if somebody else wants to read it, just to give us a second voice to go over this.
Sure, I can jump in there, Sean.
Yep.
There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of Cathedral Tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it any, 'tis the seal despair. An imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death.
So with a slightly different voice, what do you notice? That time as you were speaking, Paul, I actually thought a little bit more about just how big it is. Whatever it is, this thing that she's talking about, it's bigger than her, bigger than, I think that's where maybe like the cathedral, I think about just how, if you've ever stood in a cathedral, you can, the vastness of it, the bricks, the height of it, the transcendence of it, like by pulling in those images, yeah, Paul, I get more despair now. I'm missing the hope. I love that comment. No, that's good. Yeah, because actually there is a certain sense of stepping into a giant cathedral and the powerlessness of the whole thing, right? And the whole thing. Now this verse is actually paired with with the Bible verses that go with Ash Wednesday. And I'll pull those up here in a second there. There we go. Way too many words. And I see by the clock we are running towards the end of our time together actually for today. So I will I will zip through what I think would have been my main point just to get to where we're at. So instead of reading all of Matthew 6 concerning almsgiving, concerning prayer, concerning fasting, concerning treasures, I think the lectionary chooses this for Lent because it's instructions on how to be a good, pious Lenten practitioner, right? So concerning almsgiving, don't be like a hypocrite. Like, and the hypocrites are maybe you can imagine somebody wearing a giant mask doing some big street performance, and they're putting on a show, but the real them is underneath. Concerning prayer, they put on a show, but the real them is underneath. Concerning fasting, they put on a show, but the real them is underneath. And I think what this poem for me and these texts, the way they kind of pulled together was that there's a certain show of life and how you should be and shoulding on each other. My men's group, we always talk about, are you shoulding on each other? We've just we've gotten rid of the word should. Whenever one of the men in the men's group says should, then we jump on that man and say, no, you cannot say should. It's like you are going to choose to go and do that thing. You are not shoulding to do that, right? Oh, I should, well, like you should be doing this for your kids. It's like, no, you should not. No more shoulding. Shoulding is no more a word. And so moving very quickly through, I think the theological concept of God knowing and seeing and being in all things and seeing all things and knowing what's done in secret, even all of the despairs, even all of the reality of how you're really feeling versus this hypocrite, this mask, this thing that you present, or this way you perform to try and gain favor with your community or gain favor with God. My goodness, do people keep trying to gain favor with God? And it's such a shocking, weird thing for them to realize that they cannot gain more favor with God. God is already fully loving them just where they're at. Anyway, so I'm just zipping along. As we look at 10:56 on my clock, Emily Dickinson, the Poetry of Lent. For the rest of the week, there is a practice in your handout. If in your handout you have a whole list of practices. I've kind of pulled the first one out. I'm the leader for next week to get us into the next Emily Dickinson poem. In the poetry list, there are several poems that you can explore a little bit more, and we can probably go for, a PhD thesis on each one of the poems individually, but we're going to try and bounce off the things that really punch us in the face. And I think we grabbed some of the things that were kind of neat there out of that today. But for the rest of this week, begin each day by lighting a candle of reflection, praying, God of light and life, help me to put first things first today. Help me notice the things that are weighing me down so I can relinquish them and give my eyes to the signs of your grace so I can embrace them. In Jesus' name, amen. God of light and life, help me put first things first today. So I don't know what your Lenten practice is. Maybe you already have one, and by all means, keep with that. Next week, I'm going to start right where we're ending off here, which is to ask the question about what did you notice in a morning lighting of a candle? So if you don't do it, that's totally fine. I'm not saying you have to do it, but I'm going to ask that question next week. And maybe somebody wants to say, I noticed every morning I wake up and I am in despair and I'm not seeing the hope, or I'm seeing the hope, but I'm not seeing the despair at all. And so I feel like things are really good, or I feel like I'm in denial, or like whatever it is, we're going to kind of explore that a little bit further as we go along. Well, on that note, then I wanted to loop all the way back to the song. This is what the Music That Makes Community people do with us all the time. Let us sing this together, and we'll do it all together and see if we can. So no repeat, just sing straight through it this time. You are in the right place. You are carrying light. God will not let you fall. You are in the right place. You are carrying light. God will hold you through all. And peace be with you as you head into your Lenten journey, or your, like in my case, my 11 o'clock meeting. So God bless to everybody, and see you next week.